Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at the world of psychiatry,
Right.
specifically how it's being shaped by all the new discoveries in
Yes.
neuroscience. You've sent over some really interesting research articles and notes, and we're excited to dig in and see what we can learn.
Yeah, it's a fascinating field and it's evolving so rapidly.
Yeah. And from what I've seen in these materials, it seems like we're moving beyond just the psychological explanations of mental health.
Yeah.
And we're really starting to understand, like, the brain's role.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like a revolution in the way we're thinking about mental health.
Yeah.
We're recognizing that it's not just about thoughts and feelings, but also about the physical structures and processes happening in the brain.
So instead of just focusing on therapy or counseling, we're also looking at, like, the brain's biology
Right.
to understand things like depression or anxiety.
Right. It's not that therapy or counseling aren't important,
Right.
but by understanding the brain's role, we can develop new treatments and potentially even prevent these conditions.
Okay, that makes sense. So where do we even begin with something as complex as the brain?
Well, one of the biggest areas of research has been in genetics.
Okay.
Scientists are finding that genes play a much larger role in mental health than we previously thought.
So nature versus nurture. It's
Yeah.
leaning more toward nature.
It's not quite that simple,
Okay.
but genes definitely provide the blueprint. For example, studies on identical twins have shown a really strong link between genetics and schizophrenia.
Okay.
If one twin develops schizophrenia,
Hmm.
there's about an 80% chance the other twin will too.
Wow, 80%.
It's huge.
It is now. Compare that to fraternal twins who share about 50% of their genes like any other siblings.
Right.
For them, the chance drops to around 10%.
Wow.
It really highlights the power of genetics.
So it seems like our genes can significantly increase the likelihood of developing certain mental health conditions.
But does that mean it's like a foregone conclusion?
Not at all.
Okay.
Genes aren't destiny.
Okay.
While they lay the groundwork, plenty of other factors come into play,
Okay.
like our environment, our experiences, and lifestyle choices.
That's reassuring to know.
Yeah.
It means we still have some control over our mental well-being.
Absolutely. But speaking of understanding the brain, let's talk about brain imaging.
Okay.
It's allowing us to literally see what's happening in the brain.
Like, I've heard of things like PET scans. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, PET scans are one example.
Okay.
They use a special substance called a radio tracer to measure activity in different brain regions.
Okay.
It allows researchers to see which areas light up during certain tasks or emotional states.
So we can actually see which parts of the brain are involved in things like feeling anxious or depressed.
Yes. For instance, in people with depression, PP scans often show altered activity in the prefrontal cortex,
Okay.
which is involved in decision-making, and the amygdala, which processes emotions like fear and anxiety.
So we're not just guessing anymore. We have actual visual evidence of what's going on in the brain.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's helping us understand why people with certain mental health conditions experience specific symptoms.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
It seems like brain imaging is like a real game changer in psychiatry.
It is.
Yeah.
It's giving us a much deeper understanding of the biological underpinnings of mental health.
So we've talked about genes, we've talked about brain imaging, but what about how our bodies respond to stress? I know that plays a role in mental health too.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
A lot of research is focused on the HPA axis,
Okay.
which is our central stress response system.
The HPA axis.
Yeah.
I've seen that term before.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely sure what it means.
Think of it like a chain reaction in your body that gets triggered when you encounter a stressful situation.
So when we feel stressed, the HPA axis kicks into gear.
Exactly. It starts in the brain with the hypothalamus,
Okay.
which sends a signal to the pituitary gland,
Right.
which then signals the adrenal glands to release cortisol.
Cortisol, the stress hormone, right?
That's it.
Okay.
And cortisol is actually helpful in small doses.
Okay.
It gives us energy and helps us cope with challenges.
So it's like our body's natural defense mechanism.
Precisely. But here's where things can go wrong.
Yep.
If the HPA axis doesn't shut off properly, we can get stuck in a state of chronic stress.
Meaning our bodies are constantly pumping out cortisol even when there's no real danger.
That's right. And that chronic overactivation of the HPA axis has been linked to a number of mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, and even PTSD.
So if our stress response is constantly on high alert, it can actually contribute to these conditions.
Yes. And it highlights the importance of finding healthy ways to manage stress.
That makes a lot of sense. So we're starting to see that mental health is really this complex interplay between our genes, our brain activity, and even how our body responds to stress.
Exactly. It's not just one thing. It's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
And that's why this research is so important. The more we understand about these factors, the better equipped we'll be to develop effective treatments and help people live healthier lives.
This is all incredibly fascinating. It seems like the field of psychiatry is really undergoing this huge transformation thanks to neuroscience.
It is, and this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
There's so much more to discover, and every new discovery brings us closer to understanding the complexities of the human brain and how it shapes our mental well-being.
I'm already eager to learn more, but before we move on, is there anything else about this neuroscience revolution in psychiatry that you think is important for our listener to understand?
I think the key takeaway is that we're moving away from simplistic explanations of mental health and embracing a more holistic view.
Okay.
We're recognizing that mental health is just as important as physical health, and it's rooted in the biology of our brains.
That's a powerful message. It really destigmatizes mental health conditions and encourages people to seek help.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that these conditions are not a sign of weakness or a character flaw.
Right.
They're often the result of complex biological processes that we're just beginning to unravel.
This has been an eye-opening start to our deep dive.
Yeah.
I'm ready to hear more about how this knowledge is being used to develop new treatments.
Let's get into that next. There's some really exciting advancements happening in that area.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we've talked about how genetics and brain imaging are helping us understand mental health conditions, but what about treatments? Are there new treatments being developed based on this knowledge?
Definitely one of the most promising areas is the development of personalized medicine.
Okay.
It's the idea that treatments can be tailored to an individual's specific needs and their unique brain biology.
That sounds pretty futuristic. How does that even work?
Well, it starts with gathering a lot of information about the individual.
Okay.
This includes not only their symptoms, but also things like their genetic makeup, brain activity patterns, and even their lifestyle factors.
So it's like creating this detailed profile of their mental health.
Exactly. And once we have that information,
Okay.
we can start to identify the best treatment options for that specific person.
Okay.
For example, if we know that someone has a particular gene that makes them less responsive to a certain type of medication,
Right.
we can avoid prescribing that medication or adjust the dosage accordingly.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like taking the guesswork out of treatment and making it much more precise.
Right. And this is where things like artificial intelligence and machine learning come in.
Okay.
They can help us analyze vast amounts of data and identify patterns that would be impossible for humans to see.
So we're using technology to personalize mental health care.
Exactly. It's still early days, but the potential is enormous.
Wow.
Imagine a world where we can predict which treatments will be most effective for each individual, minimizing side effects and maximizing outcomes.
That would be incredible. But it also sounds like it could raise some ethical concerns, right?
Of course, whenever we're dealing with sensitive information like genetics and brain data, we need to be very careful about privacy and security.
Right.
We need to ensure that this data is used responsibly and ethically.
Absolutely. It's important to balance these incredible advancements with careful consideration of the potential risks. So personalized medicine is one area of treatment research, but are there others?
Yes, there are a number of exciting developments happening in other areas as well.
Okay.
For instance, there's a lot of interest in non-invasive brain stimulation techniques,
Okay.
like transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS.
DMS.
Yeah,
I've heard of that, but I'm not exactly sure what it is.
it's a technique that uses magnetic pulses to stimulate or inhibit activity in specific areas of the brain.
So it's like targeting certain brain circuits with magnets.
That's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
And the amazing thing is that it's non-invasive, meaning there's no surgery involved.
So it's like a way to tune the brain without actually going inside.
Precisely. TMS has shown a lot of promise in treating conditions like depression and anxiety. And because it's non-invasive, it's often considered a safer alternative to medication or more invasive procedures.
That's fascinating. It sounds like TMS could be like a real game changer for people who haven't found relief with more traditional treatments.
It could.
Are there any downsides or risks?
Like any medical procedure, there are potential side effects,
Okay.
but they're generally mild and temporary things like headaches or scalp discomfort.
Okay.
But overall, TMS is considered safe and well tolerated.
Okay, good to know. It sounds like a very promising treatment option.
It is, and there are other non-invasive techniques being explored as well,
Oh,
such as transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS,
okay.
which uses a low-level electrical current to modulate brain activity.
Wow, it seems like there's this whole world of new treatment possibilities opening up thanks to neuroscience.
There is, and it's not just about finding new ways to stimulate or inhibit brain activity. Researchers are also looking at ways to target specific neurotransmitters in the brain.
Can you remind me what neurotransmitters are again?
They're the chemical messengers that allow brain cells to communicate with each other. You can think of them like tiny couriers that carry messages from one neuron to the next.
Okay, right. And I remember you mentioned that like imbalances in neurotransmitters can contribute to mental health conditions.
Exactly. For example, serotonin is a neurotransmitter that plays a role in mood regulation,
Uh,
and low levels of serotonin have been linked to depression.
so that's why some antidepressants work by like boosting serotonin levels in the brain.
Right. But there are many other neurotransmitters involved in mental health, each with their own specific roles.
Okay.
Dopamine is involved in reward and motivation, norepinephrine in alertness and focus, and GABA in calming the nervous system.
It seems like there are a lot of different players involved in keeping our brains functioning properly.
There are, and the exciting thing is that researchers are developing new medications and therapies that target these specific neurotransmitters with greater precision than ever before.
So instead of just broadly affecting the brain, we can now target the specific chemical imbalances that contribute to certain mental health conditions.
Exactly. And this is leading to treatments that are more effective and have fewer side effects. It's a really exciting time to be in this field.
It sounds like, so we've covered personalized medicine, non-invasive brain stimulation techniques, and new ways to target neurotransmitters. Is there anything else on the horizon that you think is particularly promising?
Well, one area that's generating a lot of buzz is the use of psychedelics in mental health treatment.
Psychedelics, you mean like LSD and magic mushrooms?
Yes, for a long time, these substances were seen as purely recreational drugs.
Right.
But recent research has shown that they may have therapeutic potential when used in a controlled setting and with proper guidance.
That's really interesting, but also a little bit surprising. How could substances that are known to alter consciousness be helpful for mental health?
It's still early days, but there are a couple of theories. One is that psychedelics can help people break out of negative thought patterns and see the world in a new way, potentially leading to lasting changes in behavior and outlook.
So it's like a reset button for the brain.
In a way, yes. And another theory is that psychedelics can increase neuroplasticity,
Okay.
which is the brain's ability to change and adapt. This could make it easier for people to learn new coping mechanisms and form healthier habits.
So we're talking about using these substances not to get high, but to actually rewire the brain in a positive way.
Exactly. But it's important to emphasize that this research is still in its early stages, and there are a lot of questions that need to be answered before psychedelics become widely available as a treatment option.
Of course, it sounds like there's a lot of potential there, but also a lot of caution is needed.
Absolutely. We need
Yeah.
to proceed carefully and do the research to ensure these substances are used safely and effectively.
It seems like we're really at the forefront of a mental health revolution.
We are, and the most exciting thing is that we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
As we continue to learn more about the brain and develop new technologies, the possibilities for treating and preventing mental health conditions are virtually limitless.
Before we move on, I want to make sure I understand like the key takeaways from this part of our deep dive.
Sure.
It seems like the biggest takeaway is that neuroscience is leading to this whole new wave of treatments that are more targeted, personalized, and effective than ever before.
That's exactly right. And I think another important takeaway is that there's hope.
Yeah.
For so long, mental health conditions were shrouded in stigma and misunderstanding. But as we gain a better understanding of the brain,
Yeah.
we're shedding light on these conditions and developing new tools to help people live healthier, more fulfilling lives.
That's a really powerful message. I think it's something our listener will find both fascinating and encouraging.
I hope so. It's a message that deserves to be shared widely.
You know, we've covered so much in this deep dive, from genetics to brain imaging to the HPA axis.
It really has been quite a journey exploring how neuroscience is changing the way we think about mental health.
And, you know, one thing that really stuck with me is this whole idea of personalized medicine.
Yeah.
You know, tailoring treatments to each person's brain.
It is a really powerful concept, and it's already starting to change the way we approach mental health care.
But it also seems incredibly complex. You know, how do we even begin to personalize treatments for something as intricate as the brain?
Well, all starts with data.
Data.
Lots and lots of data.
Okay, so we're talking about gathering information about a person's genes, brain activity, lifestyle, all of that.
Exactly. It's like creating this really detailed mental health profile for each individual.
And then how do we use that information to actually personalize the treatment?
Well, that's where things like artificial intelligence and machine learning come in.
AI.
Yeah, these technologies are really good at analyzing huge data sets and identifying patterns and making predictions.
So we're using AI to basically help us make better treatment decisions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where we can predict which medication will work best for someone
Wow,
based on their genes and other factors.
that's incredible.
Or imagine where we can actually tailor therapy sessions to address someone's specific needs.
That would be a game changer.
Yeah,
It's like taking all the guesswork out of mental health care.
it is. And it's not just about AI. We're also seeing so much progress in brain imaging, genetic testing, all kinds of new technologies.
It sounds like we're really like at the beginning of a whole new era in mental health.
We are.
One that's really driven by data and technology.
An era that holds so much promise for improving the lives of so many people.
With all this progress, though, it's important to think about the ethical considerations, right?
Oh, absolutely. As we develop these powerful new tools, we need to be very mindful of how they might impact individuals and society as a whole.
Like, what kind of ethical concerns are we talking about? Well, one big one is privacy. You know, we're collecting more and more sensitive information about people's brains, and we need to make sure that data is kept safe.
Makes sense. We don't want that information being misused.
Right. Another concern is access.
Good.
We need to make sure that everyone can benefit from these new technologies and treatments, not just people who can afford them.
So we need to think about equity.
Exactly. And then there are even bigger questions about enhancement.
Enhancement.
As we learn more about the brain, we may be able to develop technologies that can actually enhance cognitive abilities, things like boosting memory or even changing personality traits.
That sounds a little bit like science fiction.
It does, but it's a conversation we need to start having now.
Yeah.
What are the ethical implications of enhancing our brains? Where do we draw the line between treatment and enhancement? These are big questions with no easy answers.
It seems like we're entering uncharted territory here,
We are.
with amazing possibilities, but also some potential risks. And it's going to require a lot of careful thought and open discussion and collaboration to navigate these challenges.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening.
Good.
It's really given me a new way of thinking about mental health and all the progress that's happening.
It's been a pleasure to share this with you.
As we wrap up, is there like a final thought you'd like to leave our listener with?
Yeah, I think the main takeaway is that we're living in a truly amazing time.
Yeah.
A time where we're finally unlocking the mysteries of the brain, and this knowledge has the potential to change mental health care forever and ultimately to improve the well-being of so many people.
That's inspiring, and I think it's the perfect way to end our deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We hope you learned something new and that you'll continue to explore the fascinating world of neuroscience and mental health.